Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's webinar is titled How Digital Lab Assistants Can Improve GMP Data Integrity. My name is Andrew Jernan and I'll be your X Talks host for today. And today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. And this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars really work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel. That's on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you do have any or need any assistance, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using that chat panel. And at this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. All right, well, now I'd like to thank LabTwin, who helped develop the content for this presentation. LabTwin is creating the next generation of digital lab tools for smart labs, starting with the world's first voice-activated lab assistant. With LabTwin, scientists can collect data, access information, manage experiments, and streamline documentation simply by talking. Using voice recognition and machine learning technology, LabTwin's Smart Assistant simplifies data capture, structures valuable information, and provides suggestions to scientists in real time so they can make more informed, data-driven decisions. And with a mission to empower scientists, LabTwin is backed by BCG Digital Ventures and Sartorius. Its voice-powered assistant is used by hundreds of scientists in leading biopharma and academic institutions around the world, including Deutsches Primatenzentrum, University Medical Center Göttingen, and the University of California, San Francisco. All right, well, now I'd like to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. Stefan Gloth is a mechatronics engineer with more than a decade of successful experience in the biotechnology industry. Before co-founding LabTwin, Gloth served for over 12 years in various positions at Sartorius, where he helped empower scientists and engineers to simplify and accelerate their scientific progress. As a pragmatic and strategic thinker, Gloth is responsible for all business operations at LabTwin. And your second speaker for today, Cheryl Blasey, after attaining a PhD in chemistry from Johns Hopkins University, she worked as a senior research scientist at Centocor, a biotech company subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, before taking responsibility in CMC program management. After a second experience in Promedior, another biotech company recently acquired by Roche, Cheryl started her now well-established career at Bristol Myers Squibb. There she worked in CMC program management, biologics, analytical compliance and specifications, early assets and compliance, and is currently working as the director for analytical quality and compliance. And your third speaker for today, starting as a QA specialist at Bayer, Eric Cooksey has since then developed an extensive experience in the quality arena of biotechs and pharmaceutical production, managing and implementing quality systems at Pharmavite, Dendreon, Vical, and Peregrine Pharmaceuticals. He is today in charge of auditing CRO and vendors for Karyopharm Therapeutics, who outsources its lab work to ensure GMP compliance at each level. And finally, your final speaker for today, with an education in biochemistry and quality management, Sophia Lang has more than 10 years of experience in GMP regulated environments in the pharmaceutical industry, from research experience to analytical laboratory and manufacturing practice in QC and QA roles. And in her current position, she leads and drives the quality management systems for the Berlin site of Atrium Innovations. And I'm excited to hear from all of you to get your insights today. So let's get started here with today's presentation. This webinar is really part of a series from LabTwin, so I encourage you to view those recordings for those webinars, Top Laboratory Informatics Trends in 2020 and Beyond, Opportunities and Challenges of Voice Assistants in Pharma R&D, and how is mobile technology driving the lab of the future. All of those webinars I'm going to be passing forward through to you in the chat box right now. So if you are on this webinar right now, I think you'll get some insights and you'll be interested to view those recordings as well. So I encourage you to do that. Those are in your chat boxes right now. So have a look at those. But now let's jump into today's topic, how digital lab assistants can improve GMP data integrity. And let's have a look at the agenda for today's webinar. We'll begin with a discussion about the importance of data integrity in pharma. So what components are necessary to maintain data integrity, and what does this mean from a regulatory perspective? And after getting that foundation of understanding, we'll talk about the challenges of GMP compliance. So day-to-day challenges, what day-to-day challenges are presented to pharma in terms of documentation and compliance. And sorry about that. And in part 3, we'll discuss how these gaps might be filled by digital lab assistants. Finally, we'll close with perspectives from our speakers about GXP Compliance 4.0 and perhaps aspirations for the future with respect to automatic data capture in this type of setting, what this could mean for the industry. So let's get started with our first section here. It's always important to set some context before we dive into the details. So let's open with a broad discussion of evidence collection and how maintaining data integrity is crucial for presenting evidence to regulatory bodies like the FDA and EMA. So to ensure good documentation practices, we have the tool Alcoa Plus. So here's a representation of that on the slide here for reference. So attributable, legible, original, accurate, my favorite word, contemporaneous, the plus being a few extra concepts. Stefan, I'm going to lead off with you. Can you take us through a few of these components and from your experience, give us any insights on how they're being used to develop data integrity strategies?
Yeah, sure, Andrew, and thank you so much for the nice introduction. Yeah, I will answer that question by explaining the principles again by using some examples throughout the description. But before I'm giving you some background actually on the importance of data integrity in general. So the data integrity is since around, I would say 2010, probably the #1 in FDA inspections. And a couple of years ago, where I was still with Sartorius, I had a close exchange with a customer after an FDA audit, where they said to me that the inspector actually spent 5 days on site at the client and were looking 3 days in totally into just data integrity. So that's currently the move of the FDA these days. And actually, not just the FDA, the most people just talking about the FDA, it's also the British, Swedish, and the other European countries. And you also need to know that the topic of data integrity is actually not just a pharma topic. It goes throughout other industries like steel industries. There are some quite examples where steel industries or steel companies try to manipulate actually steel quality data. Or I mean, there's a even more prominent example in the car industry these days. Well, so to understand basically the data integrity, in the morning when I prepared for the presentation, I wrote down actually a sentence for myself, which makes it, for me at least, very, very clear. So the extent to which all data is complete, constant, and accurate throughout the data life cycle from initial generation, and that's very important, throughout recording processing, including transformation of data from manual to computerized systems. So we are always talking about computerized systems. Throughout backup phases, use, retention, archiving, retrieval, and finally to destruction of the data. I personally understand data always being at the center of a triangle, actually. So, which consists out of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the key to that is data integrity. And this is here actually described as the Alcoa principle. And the most people don't mix it up with Aluminium Corporation of America. So this is actually here something different. And it starts always with attributable. So it clearly indicates we recorded the data or performed the activity and what is being signed and when it's being dated. And you exactly know who wrote the document and the record and when. The L stands for legible. I mean, Andrew already mentioned that. It must be possible to read, interpret the data after it's recorded. Permanent. That means actually no pencils, no unexplained symbols or code. Right? So coders always try to promote HTML code, but this is actually not usable. And properly corrected if required, of course. And here your favorite, Andrew, comes again, contemporaneous. The data has to be recorded at the time where it was generated. And this is actually, Andrew, also my favorite, because I have a very nice example here. I went a couple of years ago to a company, and you may know that Sartorius is a former balance company, where they had balances, where the balances actually were 5 rooms away down the corridors. And the scientists go along to do the weighing. They try to remember trying to remember the weighing, and they come back 5 rooms and then they wrote it down. So this is actually not the best practice for explaining and fulfilling the contemporaneous in the core principle. And then we go over to original. So the data has to be preserved in an unaltered stage. And here I also have a very, very nice example from nowadays from the computerized systems. And I think Cheryl is actually a big fan of that, because it's very often that ELN systems are running on computers, not at the place where actually the experiment is being conducted. So the operator, in the most cases, is writing down notes, which are needed during the work in the lab. So, but what is happening then is that the lab worker, so the operator, is writing down results on the piece of paper. I heard between scientists that sometimes this is also a paper towel, and pasting the notes after the experiment is being conducted back into the ELN. But the issue is happening now. So they're throwing the piece of paper into the bin. And when the FDA comes into the house, they don't think that this is cool, and they see this as cardinal sin, because the paper actually, even the paper towel, was in that very moment the original record. And lastly, it needs to be accurate, right? So the data must correctly reflect the action or the observation, and it needs to be checked if it's necessary. And here, it is also very important. What the most people forget, they think, okay, I need now a 4 eyes principle all the time. But this is actually not true, because in your risk assessment, you should clearly differentiate between critical and non-critical data. So an example here is, for example, the webinar tonight, right? So the topic, content, critical, the exact time when it started and ended, non-critical. So in this context, it's always crucial to look at critical and non-critical data. Yeah, and actually the plus at the end. So the plus describes just some additional attributes to these major ones. It says it needs to be complete, consistent, enduring, and available. I guess, Andrew, tonight we have not the time to go also over these. But I'm pretty sure, as I mentioned before, that Cheryl has also a strong opinion on how ELN systems are currently used in the actual labs.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you for that review, Stefan. Some good examples there. Absolutely. Yeah, let's hear from Cheryl. You're the Director of Analytical Quality and Compliance, obviously having some experience also incorporating these concepts into your work. Cheryl, how does this work day to day for you?
So I really liked Stefan's articulation of a data record, right? And that you really have to look at a data record all the way from its creation through all of the different steps into destruction. And right, and so the length of that data record and all of the different attributes that we need to consider. for that data record. One of the other extensions, though, that I think is really important, and how my team and I look at this, is it's not just the individual record itself. It's also, when you look at each of these attributes, each one of these attributes has to be maintained well past the release of your batch if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, or the release of your cars if you're in the, the automotive, or airplanes if you are in the aerospace industry, because these records become integral to places where you might need to perform an investigation, perhaps. And again, I think most of us remember what happened recently with the MAX planes with Boeing, right? When you're thinking about data integrity, you're really thinking about making sure that you have the quality systems in place to track all of these, so that if you need to go back in 7 years, and in pharma, we need to keep our batch records, we need to keep our records for 7 years past the destruction of the batch or the exhaustion of the batch, right? So if you have not built these attributes into your quality systems, you're going to have a really hard time coming back and doing investigations if necessary. So how my team has approached this is, when for the types of contributions that we make to Bristol Myers Squibb, we really look to make sure that our test methods are really hitting all of these points, right? So we've developed templates that are legible, they will stand the test of time. We want to make sure that all the data is recorded at the time it's generated, right? We need to make, so we really try to make sure that when we're setting up these quality systems around the test methods that will eventually go to a QC lab, that we've built these things in from the beginning. Again, to Stefan's point, data integrity, huge focus right now for inspectors worldwide, and this is the first place they go. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for that, Cheryl. So I think that sets some great context for us. Let's move on now to actually our first polling question of the day. So that polling question is appearing on your screen, and as an audience member, you can vote on this polling question by clicking on any of the options there. The question we have for you: what is the biggest challenge in GMP compliance? Is that traceability, data originality, SOP compliance, or digitization? So again, you can vote on this in the audience in real time by clicking on your screen. I can see a lot of you are doing that right now. So now is the time to get your votes in. What is the biggest challenge in terms of GMP compliance? Give you another couple seconds to get your votes in on this first of 2 polling questions of the day. And I'm gonna close polling. If you plan on voting, now's the time to do it. And I'm gonna close it, and let's take a look at the results of this poll. Interesting, 38% of you saying traceability. I think that aligns with a lot of just what Cheryl was mentioning there. Digitization, obviously, also the next most popular answer, actually tied with traceability. 15% of you saying data originality, and 8% saying SOP compliance. Interesting. Thanks everyone for voting on that poll question. So let's move on now to the next section of our discussion. In my experience, just from hosting many webinars on the subject, GMP compliance is really an ever-changing landscape. And of course, it brings its challenges. We just touched on a few there in the polling question. So Cheryl, you mentioned on a previous call, you were in an audit last week where you were facing a few challenges. We're seeing from the poll there challenges associated with traceability, digitization, authenticity, SOP compliance. What types of issues were you running into with your audit last week?
So the audit was an internal audit. So I was very thankful for that. And of course, as we all of us are in the industry, we understand that audits, especially internal ones, are designed to help catch things that we wouldn't want to find if we had an inspection, particularly a PAI inspection with a health authority, right, before we were getting ready to launch a drug. So Some of the interesting observations that came out, you know, again, compliance with SOPs. I know in the survey that was literally one of the things, you know, thinking about the lowest level of issue. There was actually quite a few statements and observations that people were not in compliance with their SOPs, especially around things like periodic review. Okay, and again, I give the question, why would that have anything to do with traceability or data authenticity or digitization? And here's where the rub is because if you're not doing your periodic reviews, you're not updating your SOPs to be consistent with potentially changes in your company on quality systems or to the CGMPs. Okay, and again, I think if any of us have your code, I have my CFRs sitting on my desk, and you know, my children tease me about it, by the way, but you know, I always look through them, and the CFRs haven't been updated for years, neither has the URLs. We really have to rely on those CGMPs, recent 483s, other observations that have come in from other companies who've been audited or inspected recently. And literally, the Post-it note in the trash is a very common problem that gets cited all the time. Data digitization is another big issue because, and this again, this is all stuff we found last week, you know, when you're dealing with electronic systems and paper systems, that hybrid, how do you get those two things to connect with each other in a way that you're maintaining originality? Right, you've got that authentic copy or the true copy as we call it. And traceability, again, we look at 21 part 11, 21 CFR part 11. And again, this is huge. Audit trails, how are records changed and updated? Is there a time date stamp? These things are really big challenges when you're working, you know, a balance, like Stefan example, five rooms away. Right, it's really important that a tool or something be created for your operators so that they don't have to remember things, because these are all things that are in recent 483s that the agencies are finding, and again, all mirrored last week in my audit. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that, Cheryl. Yeah, so obviously makes so much sense. How do you keep that data if it's on paper, getting it into a digitization form? How does that work in terms of demonstrating that that's been done accurately? I'm wondering now to hear from Sophia. Sophia, if you could give us a little bit more background. I know I had an introduction to you in our bios, but if you could give us a little sense of what you do day to day and what types of challenges you're running into in terms of GMP compliance. Sophia?
Hello, yes, can you hear me now? I'm sorry,
yeah.
before I was having some problems with the connection.
No problem.
So yes, actually listening to Cheryl, I was an example came out to my head about the hybrid systems. So in our quality system, we still, as I joined this company 2 years ago, we started with the digitalization of all the data. But of course, it's our programs that they last a long time, no? And we were the month before in a GMP inspection of the Russian authority, the Ministry of Health, right before this Corona crisis started. And everything started with a product quality review that they found in the product quality review and out of specification. And up to then, everything was very linked in a system, no? But when they start going to the laboratory records, no, everything was going more in paper because we still haven't implemented a full laboratory system. And then you have the forms, the lab books, the different areas of the laboratory, as you were also saying at the beginning, the balances not being really at the same place where they take the sample, and then they start doubting, no, about how traceable is your data and how good are you really documenting, and it's difficult to start finding all these batch records from years before, no, that if you have a digital system that supports all the data including laboratory, it makes a completely difference in streamlining audits and also building the trust of the inspectors in the original of your data that you're recording in your laboratory.
Right, right. Okay. Well, thanks for those insights. I'd like to get a little bit of input here from Eric before we move on to the next slide, so we have enough time for everything. Eric, you were involved in a recent pre-approval inspection with a CDMO you're working with, and you had to reenact that review with the audit of the audit trail. Is that correct? Can you tell us about that and what types of challenges you ran into?
Yeah, so obviously data needs to be original, also needs to be authentic, and that could actually be a challenge for companies at times. You may ask, why is this important? Well, data, first of all, could be used to, for example, release a batch of a drug. It could also be used to support a clinical trial. So why is that important? So the FDA has recently considered the use of audit trails a hot topic. So I'd like to talk quickly about an example, a real life example of where I worked for a particular company, which was a CDMO. And during a pre-approval inspection, one of the inspectors requested that we actually would reenact our current audit trail review process. So we had an SOP in place that said you had to review data, make sure that your data was integral. And what this included was the inspector literally walked into the lab, requested that an analyst would log into the computer system, and along with the established SOP, walk through the steps required to assure data integrity for data generated as a result of laboratory testing. You know, I would imagine that this is going to be something that most companies should be prepared to actually perform, because at any time this could be a request. And with the recent emphasis in data integrity, I think this could be something that's going to be very important for us.
All right, excellent. Thanks for that insight, Eric. Let's move on, for the sake of time, to our next topic here. Before we do, let's launch with our second and final polling question of the day. Which challenge do you think a digital lab assistant could help most with? So again, you can vote in real time by clicking on your screen for any of the options here. Is that traceability, data originality, SOP, compliance, or digitization? It's the same options you had on the first question we had. So what challenge do you think a digital lab assistant, that kind of concept, could help you with? Is that traceability, data originality, SOP compliance, or digitization? Okay, excuse me. Looks like most of you got your votes in, and let's close polling now and have a look at what your colleagues are saying. 42% of you saying digitization, 33% saying traceability, 25% saying data originality. No one said SOP compliance. Interesting. Very much aligning with what the poll was like in our first section. So that is interesting to note. Thanks everyone for voting on that polling question. Moving on now. So to resolve a couple of the challenges we had just discussed there, enter the mobile digital lab assistant. So this is a mobile device that can capture the audit trail as a metadata, store voice recordings, give SOP guidance, of course, digitize that data as well. And Eric, I'll lead with you as well. On another call we were on, you were discussing an interesting example of working with CAR T cells in a biosafety cabinet, and you were needing to record and document at the same time. Can you talk about that example, and do you see any opportunities there for the use of the digital lab assistant in that case?
Yeah, so as listed on the slide right here, we see opportunities for the use of digital lab assistants. I'd like to actually discussed the concept of original data being recorded. So I previously worked for a company. We manufactured a drug and that was utilizing what we would call CAR-T technology. So the vast majority of the manufacturing process really consisted of manipulations within a biosafety cabinet. So for each step that we deemed critical, there was a requirement to document these activities as required by GMP in our batch record, for example. So as we know from our Alcoa principles, data is required to be contemporaneous, meaning the recording of each activity is required at the same time that it actually takes place. So as you can imagine, documenting activities performed during manufacturing within a BSC actually could be very challenging. So this real life situation required essentially the development of a process that would allow the documenting of these activities, which were witnessed by a second operator who would serve as a double checker. So what this really means is once the operation was completed, the production operator would exit the biosafety cabinet and then would document the completion of all the activities at one time. So the FDA actually came in and inspected our organization. They did accept this practice. They also understood the constraints in place. So I really feel that the utilization of digital lab assistants, voice activated technology would be something ideal for some areas of GMP production.
Right, yeah. So in that case, just so I have a good understanding of that, so that person would need to really remember what they were doing in that biosafety cabinet and document how that occurred accurately. Okay, interesting. Thank you for that, Eric. I'd like to hear from Stefan now. Stefan, you're working with clients, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of opportunities with LabTwin and GMP. Any best use cases you can think of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best use case Eric has just described, right? So when it's actually needed, and I'm going back to the topic now of critical, non-critical data. When you are in the critical data environment and you need to really capture the data at the place where it has generated, and also in terms of immediate documentation. So LabTwin is helping here the most currently, from my understanding, especially in the combination with the run environments. So this is where we can really bring a plus here.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that as well. And let's also hear from Sophia. You've got a lot of experience in GMP regulated environments at a number of organizations over your past history. Where are you seeing the best opportunities here for digital lab assistants?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take the topic of SOP compliance and improvement of protocol adherence, just like because, let's say, nobody really votes for that, but I think it's also because it's hidden in a second layer, no? So how are you going to measure compliance, no, if you have everything in paper and it's not really traceable what you have? So actually, in order to measure your SOP compliance and improve your compliance and therefore be successful in inspection, all this digitization will make everything more easy, like to follow up and improve your KPIs measurements and therefore your performance.
Right. And I'm wondering for the rest of the speakers, Cheryl, we haven't heard from you specifically on this slide, but I have a feeling you might have some opinions on this as well. Any opportunities you're seeing for digital lab assistants?
I agree with Sophia actually on the protocol adherence. I think that is a lot of times what comes up during investigations as root causes for having an out of specification results potentially, or it leads you to an unconfirmed OOS, and then you find out it was because we didn't adhere to a protocol. So it becomes a human factor root cause, right? And so I definitely see that there's, especially in the example that Eric gave, right? You can't necessarily remember those multiple steps in an hour or 2 hours and then go write them down accurately. And I also see, again, the automatic digitization piece is huge, especially when you're looking at hybrid systems, or even if you're looking at multiple laboratories who have to access something, or multiple operators doing the same process, right? It could help synthesize that. And with regards to streamlining audits, I'm really not sure how many people like being audited. If that is not your most fun activity to deal with, what could be better than saying, look, we have this system and it's completely traceable from the reported result all the way back to the creation of the data record. I mean, your auditor would just keep going. I don't see anything better than that. Thanks.
And thank you, Cheryl, for that input. Very interesting how you see that future. Let's look even more into the future. Obviously, from what we've heard here, GMP labs are still trying to cope with heavy documentation and paperwork. There appears to be a future of automatic data capture, as we've kind of discussed here, and direct digitization of that data. Obviously, that could accelerate the process, make it more secure. And I'd like now to go around the virtual table, so to speak, and get some insights as to what you might think we'll see in the future in terms of GMP compliance 4.0. What are you looking forward to make your lives a bit more simple? Sophia, let's start with you. Any insights there of what could make your life a bit more simple?
Well, definitely a full digitalization of like manufacturing and laboratory and QC laboratory, no? That would increase like the traceability of the records, would stop like, let's say, potentially a manufacturing at the same moment that you have an out of specification. At the same moment that you have an out of specification, the material could be like automatically blocked, no? Like, so if you think not only about laboratory, but like being able to even make that laboratory system talk to your inventory system and to your quality system to raise a deviation automatically and put it as a pending task in your list. I think that we keep talking about like how it will make our lives easier from an audit and inspection and compliance point of view. But I think the business should also consider this kind of investments, because it will also bring like a huge return of investment.
Right, makes a lot of sense for that. Thanks, Sophia, for that. Cheryl, let's hear from you again. What are you hoping for in terms of a future laboratory environment in terms of GMP compliance?
So I think one of the challenges that all of us deal with is the distributed quality pieces, right? Most of us, and Eric talked about working with a CDMO. CMOs, CDMOs, CROs, they are here to stay. And I think when you're looking at testing in particular, and you have multiple sites that are contributing to your certificate of analysis, I think that, in addition to data integrity, I think having something that can integrate all that is going to be really important in a way that is linked to, the quality systems and other pieces, right? So, thanks.
All right, thanks for that as well, Cheryl, for those insights. Eric, I'm wondering about your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, so I would probably consider the concept of instant auditability. That would come into play, like I said, and Cheryl actually brought up a really good point. You should be proud to be able to provide proof of data integrity with the use of a system like this that would involve how your data was actually collected through your process to when your actual record was created. So if you were able to reenact that with an inspector, for example, I agree with what Cheryl said. You should be confident. And a lot of times when inspectors see a system like this and they have a feeling that your data integrity is accurate, they'll move on to something else. They'll leave that and move to something else. And we all should agree that that is the ultimate goal.
Right, yeah, I think that aligns pretty much with everyone else. Stefan, I'm going to leave the last word to you here. You're really working on the cutting edge there with LabTwin. So what do you see in terms of the future of GMP compliance?
Yeah, I think when you're looking back and what I have just described at the very beginning of the presentation, what the inspectors usually looking for during an audit is mostly plausibility. So they're looking back in the example I've just described over the balance, a series of weighings. Is it plausible that the user has captured these 5 weighings in 1 minute, for example? And this is where the latest cutting edge technology from my perspective can really help in future. With the help of neural networks, with the help of artificial intelligence, these systems will be able to identify those plausibility errors before they arise during an audit for the inspector, before the warning letter will arise. Right? So this is where I currently see one of the biggest trends, also in terms of neural networks, artificial intelligence, and this kind of stuff.
Wow, yeah, definitely sounds like many topics, other topics we could talk about there. Thank you, everyone there, for your insights. Stefan, I'll continue with you here. Looks like LabTwin can give us a GXP focused demo. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think back, so the topic of tonight was, when you're thinking about the questions and the polls, was traceability and original records, and I'm repeating here myself. So this is where LabTwin can bring big value on the table for providing always the evidence, for providing a great user interface, a great usage of a product for the people who are currently faced with a lot of challenges when you think during coronavirus and all those kind of things. So this is where we can really support users, and everybody is welcome to get in contact with us, schedule a demo. We are really happy to help and to support all the users who are currently listening for their challenges.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for that offer. Cheryl, in the back channel here, I think you have some additional comments here on the future of GMP compliance. Don't want to leave you out there.
Right.
You got some additional insights there for us.
Yeah, I apologize. I forgot to mute my desk phone, and it kind of distracted me a little bit. I guess the other thing is that, when I think from a digital capacity standpoint, right, the more that you can bridge systems, and if you can use and processes, right? So we're not just talking about one thing or another. We're talking about bringing a human into a process where we need to have data integrity in the background, right? And of course, one of the other things that was mentioned in our audit was about computer system validation, which kind of goes hand in hand with all of the things that we've been talking about over the last hour. And when we can create something that's a validated system, a validated digital system that can link multiple different processes with multiple different operators, it will also lead, I think it was Eric who might have said it, it leads you to advantages with regard to cost, right? Because these batches that we're manufacturing cost a lot of money. And if we can reduce the amount of time that a product is on the shop floor or that it's in testing, right? And we don't have to do a lot of data review to link hybrid systems or do investigations, because we have something that makes it digitized immediately and completely linked. that reduces our costs. And I think that the only other thought I had about this is when we think about pharma, small molecules, we think about process analytical technologies, right, PAT. We also have another concept called real-time release testing, which hasn't really, it's in certain areas, but not widespread in pharma. When you look at those two things, I could definitely see a digital assistant can also help with making those things more readily available to larger segments of the industry. So thanks for letting me jump back in. I appreciate that.
No, and I appreciate that, Cheryl. Thank you for that final insight. Before we move to the Q&A period, I just did want to mention to the audience that you can download a report of how LabTwin is being harnessed and could be harnessed in GMP workflow. So look to your control panels, you can download that. But let's now jump into the Q&A session of this webinar. I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions and comments using that questions window. A lot of you have been sending in your questions already, so we'll try to get to as many of those as we can right now. Starting with our first question, very open-ended to anyone who wants to jump in. What type of risk assessment is involved when transferring manual data, written data, I'm assuming, to an electronic system in a GMP environment? If anyone could kind of elaborate on that risk assessment process. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to say that question. Oh, great. If you heard that there, Sophia.
I can tell my point of view is like always the main risk is definitely data integrity, no? But for me, the most important point is to follow always the computer system validation, no? That you need to have like all your all the transfer need to be validated to ensure the traceability of the data. So right. Usually, like you have many systems, many equipment, and running all those system-related equipment validations are the most challenging ones.
Sure.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with you, Sophia. So the biggest challenges in terms of risk assessments for computerized systems are not the electronic systems itself. If you have a 100% electronic systems, the issue in the most cases are these hybrid systems. So a mixture of an electronic system and a paper system. This is in terms of risk assessment, the most critical environment.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you both for your insights on that question.
And if I can add one more thing,
yeah, for sure.
The last thing that I wanted to add, like that I can talk about my experience with different Ministry of Health in GMP inspections, audit trail, no? Like in a lot of inspectors, they are still a little bit like let's say old-fashioned, and like they not only request like all the new guidelines of computer system evaluation, but one of the things that is always in a discussion is the audit trail review. No? A lot of inspectors, they request that you do it yearly. But if you do yearly audit trails review, that requires a lot of like time and resources.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Sophia. Thank you also, Stefan. Moving on to another question, perhaps a good one for Stefan. We've got a couple of questions here surrounding the QC lab. Could you give us some examples for relevance of the digital lab assistant in a QC lab?
Yeah, I mean, in the QC lab, you have, so every time when a user's, and to be frank here in this round, I'm the alien because I'm the only one who never worked in QC. I'm always worked from the vendor kind of perspective. But every time when a user is entering a QC lab, they are always following certain procedures, certain SOPs. And I mean, this was also part of the poll. These users with a digital lab assistant, you can take some pressure off the shoulders of the users, because with digital systems, the digital systems can support the users throughout the entire process in order to remember every single step, what they have to do, and what is critical and which data they need to capture. So you basically always, when you're talking about a certain SOP for action that needs to be performed, a digital lab assistant can support here to basically be the assistant of the lab user to remember stuff, what is written and what they need to consider when they're working according to a certain SOP.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Stefan. Another question here. We were touching on the topic of distributed quality control. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what that topic means, distributed quality control? Anyone here on the panel?
So I'll take that one, Andrew. I think when again, distributed quality control, I think if you have a specification and you have 15 test methods on your specification and you're utilizing 3 or 4 test labs in order to generate the data to complete that specification. And it could be that all 3 or 4 of those labs are internal to your company, except I think what we're finding now, or what we're seeing more and more of, is those 3 or 4 labs might be distributed among internal and external testing sites. So that's my definition of a distributed quality control system.
All right, excellent. Hopefully that cleared it up for that audience member. Another question here, any advice on the challenges regarding to the Alcoa concept we were discussing early on in the presentation for remote operations and auditing? Probably something of interest, especially right now. So any advice on the challenges regarding Alcoa for remote operations and auditing?
May I take this one? So currently, I think it will still take some time to identify all the challenges due to the corona situations currently, because travel is reduced, all this kind of stuff. But I mean, in terms of remote operations and auditing, you're talking here always about a cloud environment, and the cloud environment always needs a special kind of treatment in terms of validation, all that kind of things. It can bring challenges, but all those challenges can be solved. So cloud environment, for example, is nothing what the people need to fear, at least at these days.
I'll also add something here, Andrew. The audit that I went through a week ago was a remote audit. Okay, so the audit structure was solely electronic documents, so that the auditors nor the line functions being audited needed to go to site to get any paper records or true records. So it was not very hard for the auditors to figure out that records or documents were created non-contemporaneously. It was really easy for them to figure that out with the other quality systems that they had at their disposal during this only electronic audit. So, and again, the contemporaneous part, I think that there was another question in the chat box about what that means. And the intent of contemporaneous is that a step is performed and the data is recorded at the same time, or like within a second or 2 or whatever of each other, whatever's appropriate for the particular manipulation. So yeah, it's a challenge to make sure that all your documents are in a row. And again, enablers to getting contemporaneous records is a big, has always been a big focus of health authorities. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cheryl, for that extra insight as well. Go ahead, yeah, if you want to jump in on that.
I could add something else to auditing. Actually, we were planning a GMP inspection on our API supplier in Argentina. So we were going there with the LAGESO, the Berlin Ministry of Health, because you need the GMP certificate if you're using those APIs. And it was planned for March, and definitely all this corona crisis came out. And for the first time in the history, the local authority of Berlin started doing distance assessments in order to make it like 1 year longer, the GMP certificate that they were already having. And the main challenge that we were facing here was how to open the access to our systems to external people, in this case, inspectors. No? So you cannot really give them access because of a data protection and because all of how the systems are usually configured in a way. And you also don't want to have the inspector just like playing around in your systems, no? So how to limit the access, but not having to convert all that information in a PDF that then is so heavy to send to an authority, or in paper that you send it like via post, like back in the 80s. So I think one of the very big challenges in distance assessment or audits, and it's one of the challenges that right now even the authorities are facing, is this kind of access restrictions.
Right, absolutely. Lots to consider there, obviously, on that question. Thank you all for that. Maybe time for one more question. Probably looks good for you, Stefan. Are there any AI solutions that are able to detect data integrity issues with respect to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, of course. So, but before that, I want to give the person who asked the question about contemporaneous just a little hint. So the British, they have a very nice way to explain Alcoa and data integrity and stuff. And if you just looking up on Google MHRI data integrity guideline, then you find the entire British guideline from the British Medicine and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency for reading about that. And for the other question, you have just asked is, I mean, it goes back to what I have said before, right? So the plausibility thing, and I heard a couple of years ago that there was some initiative around blockchain for the entire data integrity thing. I'm not sure how far is that, but this could be a potential thing which could help with the entire data integrity issue.
All right. Excellent. Thank you all for your insights there on the Q&A session. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. And if we weren't able to attend to your questions during the Q&A session, the team at LabTwin may try to follow up with you after the webinar. If you do have any further questions you didn't get to, make sure to make contact with LabTwin. Via the link on your screen there, you'll find some contact information on that website. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event, and a survey window will be popping up on your screen shortly. Your participation is appreciated as it'll help us improve our further webinars. And I just sent you a link in your chat box that will take you back to where you registered for this event. You'll also be able to see the recording of this event if you want to review that or share it with your colleagues. They can register for that event and be able to view the recording of this webinar today on that same page as long as they register. So I encourage you to do that as well for your colleagues. And of course, I want to say a big thanks to all of our speakers today, Stefan Gloss, Sophia Lang, Eric Cooksey, and Cheryl Blasey. Thanks, everyone. That was a really great discussion. And we hope that, thank you, and we hope that you found this webinar informative today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.